Today's episode is sponsored by Blinkist, the app that lets you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try Blinkist totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right below this video. So Joe Biden recently put out his climate change plan and clean energy plan, and he gave really a pretty solid speech about it. And I think it's important to cover this stuff because, number one, Trump's not really doing policy. And I do think it's important to draw a contrast when one candidate is calling an urgent press conference at the White House and spending 52 minutes, I believe it was, sort of erratically misreading attacks on Joe Biden from a piece of paper, whereas Joe Biden is actually doing policy. Now, I know that some people in my audience are going to be furious with me. How dare I say that Joe Biden's climate change proposal is pretty good? It's not the Green New Deal. It's not Bernie's plan. It's not AOC's plan, or whatever the case may be. Let's analyze it critically and understand what have been the climate change policies of people who have been presidents. And by that standard, this is the most progressive climate change proposal that, if Biden is elected, would ever be associated with a sitting president. Of course, you can find people who have run, who have had other proposals which we might like better, and I'm including myself in that list. But if Biden gets elected, this would be the climate change proposal most to the left of any previous president. And that's, I think, a really important thing to keep in mind. So we're taking a break from the nonsense and the insults and the hyperbole and the bragging of Donald Trump. And I need to do a better job of, when Joe Biden talks about policy and puts out proposals, I should talk about it. Last time I did this, I went into some detail about Joe Biden's tax plan. It's pretty solid. It does a number of important things that progressives should be happy about, despite Biden's reputation as not being particularly progressive. And so I'm not going to redo the whole tax plan story, but Joe Biden's tax plan includes a number of important provisions, like removing the cap on Social Security tax above $400,000 a year in earnings. That raises a huge amount of money from people earning above $400,000 a year. Biden would proposes eliminating the stepped up basis provision for inheritances. I explained that last time. I mean, this is really significant stuff in terms of the money it would raise. I won't redo the entire tax segment, but needless to say, many in the audience appreciated it. Some just came in and said it's not as progressive as what Bernie wanted. Okay, let's now look at Joe Biden's proposal on environmental justice and climate change and clean energy. Now, off the bat, there's a bunch of sort of regulatory stuff in the proposal, which I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, but it does bear mentioning, which includes Biden would establish an environmental climate justice division in the Department of Justice. Biden would make environmental justice a priority within the federal government. Biden would refresh the way that and sort of rehash the way that the EPA does compliance. That stuff deserves attention. But I want to look at some of the specific metrics and actions that Joe Biden has included in his plan. So, for example, Joe Biden includes specific water quality improvements, just to pick one thing that's in his climate plan. And if you look at this part of the plan, Biden actually discusses and addresses specific chemicals that are too much in our drinking water. And he does it in a way where he sees water not only as an environmental issue, which it is, but also as an economic issue, which it is. He sees water as an issue of social justice as well. So I think we should all be pleased that Joe Biden is talking about water quality in his environmental proposal in a way that shows understanding of how water relates to race, class, geography, economics, et cetera, et cetera. Remember, Joe Biden said that he would use the Green New Deal as a framework in thinking about what he wants to do. And you can identify many things in his climate change and clean energy proposals that are almost verbatim from the Green New Deal. Now, what's hilarious is when Biden put this out and people identified, look, this is like straight out of Bernie's plan. This is straight out of Green New Deal. There were people who previously were criticizing Biden for not being progressive enough, who now are saying, oh, look, Biden copied stuff from Bernie and the Green New Deal. Shouldn't we be glad to see Biden adopting things from Bernie Sanders and from the Green New Deal? Like, if the concern was that Biden wasn't taking the Green New Deal seriously enough, shouldn't we be glad to see elements of the Green New Deal in Biden's proposal? And you can see these components in a few different areas. When you look at Biden's plan for retrofitting buildings and schools in a way that will be good for the environment, but economically stimulative, that's straight out of the Green New Deal. A lot of the other things Biden includes in these proposals are pretty obvious things, but they're things that aren't being done, or at least not done enough. Like, for example, more seriously putting in place subsidies and rebates when Americans upgrade to more efficient sources of energy and better windows and efficient appliances. That's worthwhile government spending. Now, 2 days ago, Donald Trump attacked Joe Biden for having an ambitious goal in his proposal. And the goal is Biden wants to be carbon pollution free electricity by 2035, meaning by 2035, Biden wants the country to be generating electricity from sources that do not pollute from the standpoint of carbon. That's a huge task. But if the criticism here is that Biden is too ambitious on climate and clean energy, I'll take it. I mean, look at the Trump administration that's going in the opposite direction, wanting to loosen emission standards for vehicles, wanting to rehabilitate coal. We've had that for 3.5 years. I'll take an overly ambitious proposal from Joe Biden any day. And importantly, one of the things I like about this proposal, again, is Joe Biden is connecting energy issues to economics and social justice and race, and he's connecting environmental issues to all of those same areas. So, for example, when Biden talks about his proposal that by 2035, he wants to be generating electricity from sources that don't pollute from the standpoint of carbon, he specifically says, let's do this by creating jobs with this green energy shift where we will look to HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, for training and hiring, et cetera. Just one example. So where I'm ending up on this is, if you know something about Joe Biden, you actually shouldn't be surprised that his climate and energy proposal is very solid. Joe Biden actually wrote the first climate change mitigation bill in 1987. He tried it in 86 and it went nowhere. In 87, it was signed into law by President Ronald Reagan. And it's particularly disappointing to see some leftists who are framing Joe Biden as kind of like reluctantly dealing with climate change, sort of. Biden actually has been on this for more than 30 years. There's lots of areas where Biden has not really been great, unless you look at the last 10 years. If you look 25 years ago, there's areas where Biden was not so good. Biden's been on climate for more than 30 years. He said he would use the Green New Deal as a framework for his proposal, and he did. So let's criticize Biden where it's warranted. Let's criticize Biden where the proposals he makes don't go far enough. And I'll be digging into that in more detail probably next week. But, the pretending that Biden is just a center right guy on every issue, including climate, it's wrong. And the fact that Biden put out this proposal reinforces the importance of trying to take the Senate so that we can maybe actually get some of these things on Joe Biden's desk, put him in a position to have to sign stuff into law rather than having this long list of proposals that will never see the light of day because Democrats don't control the Senate anyway. So for me, it's reinforcing, hey, Biden's actually been pretty good on climate for a long time. And number two, importantly, the importance of the Senate to actually get some of this stuff in front of Joe Biden to sign. So we have a panicked situation happening. So Joe Biden's putting out proposals, which we've already talked about. On the other side, Donald Trump has replaced his campaign manager, Brad Parscale, with only 3.5 months to go in the campaign. Now, Donald Trump is framing this as, this is great. I'm doing this because it's just all so wonderful. I'm going to show you in a moment how Donald Trump is presenting this change. But make no mistake, don't be confused. You only replace your campaign manager 3.5 months before the election if you're panicking and things are going terribly. And I'll actually give you an example in a moment of the last time a sitting president replaced their campaign manager 3.5 months before the election. Now, to back up a little bit, rumors have been swirling about Donald Trump being furious with his campaign manager, Brad Parscale, for a while. I think it was about 2 months ago when the polling started to go south for Trump. There were leaks from the White House that on a Friday night, Donald Trump was in the Oval Office on the phone with Brad Parscale screaming at him. And I'm paraphrasing here, saying, how the F am I losing to Joe Biden? And it's been downhill from there, both in terms of the virus and Trump's polling. And now Brad Parscale is out. Formally, they're calling this just a reorganization. As usual, Trump is trying to put a positive spin on everything he does, tweeting last night around 9 p.m. that, quote, I am pleased to announce that Bill Stepien has been promoted to the role of Trump campaign manager. Brad Parscale, who has been with me for a very long time and has led our tremendous digital and data strategies, will remain in that role while being a senior advisor to the campaign. Both were heavily involved in our historic 2016 win, and I look forward to having a big and very important second win together. This one should be a lot easier as our poll numbers are rising fast. That's not true. The economy is getting better. Vaccines and therapeutics will soon be on the way. And Americans want safe streets and communities. So let me interpret for you. Trump realizes straight up firing his campaign manager would look very, very bad. So instead, he says, hey, we're just going to shift things around. Brad Parscale is not going to be campaign manager anymore, but he'll keep doing digital stuff because he's so good there. But we're putting in place a different campaign manager, but everything's great and everything's hunky-dory. This is a firing, and you're firing someone who has failed, but you're finding a way to do it that maybe doesn't look as panicked. And the reality is Trump should be panicked because his approval is down to 36% in the latest Quinnipiac poll. We'll talk about that later. 1,000 coronavirus deaths in the United States yesterday for the first time since June 9th. So it's been 5 weeks since the U.S. had 1,000 coronavirus deaths in a day. We had it yesterday. It's tragic. Other countries have figured it out. This is unnecessary loss of life. And a new poll out yesterday shows that 62% of Americans believe that Donald Trump is actually hurting the coronavirus response rather than being a force for good when it comes to the coronavirus response. Our friend Bill Scher pointed out to me on Twitter this morning that the last time a sitting president, I know that in 2016, in the summer, Trump changed campaign managers. But now I'm talking about the last time a sitting president who was running for re-election replaced their campaign manager this late in the game was in 1992 when George H.W. Bush, Bush 41, replaced his campaign manager in the summer. We know how that turned out. Bush 41 lost to Bill Clinton just a few months later. And importantly, we also haven't had an incumbent president who was this far behind in the polls 3.5 months before an election since 1992 either. Now, in terms of the actual staff change and the strategy here from Donald Trump, I don't know what Parscale's replacement, Bill Stepien, is going to be able to do right now. Remember that Stepien was the guy fired by former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie in that entire Bridgegate debacle. That's a different story. But if Stepien was too incompetent for Chris Christie, I don't know how he helps Donald Trump. Stepien is good friends with Jared Kushner. There's speculation that that's really what this is maybe about. Hilariously, remember that Trump claims that all of the polls that have him losing are fake suppression polls, and he actually tweeted he's going up in the polls. If that's the case, if you believe you're winning, why would you take out of power your campaign manager who has you winning? It's because Trump knows that he's in trouble. And I actually don't think that Brad Parscale is the problem. I don't think Parscale is a particularly good campaign manager. He is a good data and analytics guy. But the problem is not strategy here. The problem is that Trump has failed on coronavirus and everything else that has gone on. And again, the easiest way to win this election for Trump would have been in January and February to start properly handling coronavirus from the beginning. It literally takes months to get outbreaks under control. Time is running out, right? We're in mid-July and Texas is peaking. Florida's peaking. They're going up. They may not even have peaked yet. It takes 8 to 10 weeks to flatten the cases and then an additional 20 days to flatten deaths. We're at election day, right? Understand that the timeline is if all these states did everything perfectly starting today, we are at election day before the numbers really get under control. And so all Trump has left is dirty tricks. Remember that. Understand that. Let me know where you are on this. I'm on Twitter at @DPakman. I know I told you this last week, and I told you this the week before and the week before. Yesterday, Wednesday, was the best day ever for the David Pakman Show YouTube channel and the David Pakman Show audio podcast. You go back to the beginning of the show. Yesterday was the best day on both of those platforms. And just a reminder, if you like consuming the show in a longer format, get the audio podcast for free on Stitcher, Google Play, iTunes, Pandora, Spotify, etc., wherever you prefer. We'll take a quick break and be back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
What if you could read 10 books in just one sitting? That's exactly what one of my favorite apps lets you do. It's called Blinkist, and what they do is take thousands of popular nonfiction books. They condense them down into text or audio that you can consume in 15 minutes. Blinkist makes sure that you're getting all of the important core insights from each book. So it's perfect for exploring a book you otherwise wouldn't have time for. If there's a full book you're thinking about buying, you can use Blinkist to get a sample first. Just think how much you can enrich yourself by being able to soak up an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way, and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month. And you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day are Madeline DeVita and Matthew Fisher. Thanks to both of you for supporting the David Pakman Show through membership. Also, a big thank you to Julian Ross. Julian is today's longtime sustaining member of the day, who has been with us almost 5 years. Grab yourselves a membership at joinpakman.com. Get the daily bonus show, whether you prefer it in audio or video, both are available, as well as commercial-free audio and video streams of the show, and so much more. It takes just mere seconds. Just mere. That seems actually, I don't need that. It takes mere seconds at joinpakman.com. We have a great place to discuss politics with fellow viewers. It is the David Pakman Show subreddit at davidpakman.com/Reddit. That's REDDIT. About 21,000, if you can imagine, 21,000 of our viewers and listeners are subscribed free to the David Pakman Show subreddit. User Sneaky Git posted that white supremacist David Duke has endorsed Tucker Carlson as vice president. You know, David Duke always endorses someone, and I hesitate to make too much of it. I know a lot in my audience wanted me to talk about this and point out this proves that he's a white supremacist. I'm pretty sure David Duke endorsed Tulsi Gabbard. That doesn't mean Tulsi is a white supremacist. David Duke always does this, and I think it's important not to. I mean, you know, Hitler breathed oxygen, right? That's where I go on this, and I wouldn't really make too much of it. Obviously, I agree that Tucker Carlson has fed xenophobic and white supremacist ideas on his program. One of his writers was recently fired for being discovered to have been posting racist things under a pseudonym on the internet. I'm not denying anything about what we know about Tucker Carlson. I just don't think we should pay too much attention to David Duke endorsing this person or that person. In a lot of ways, it's just David Duke trying to get himself attention. User Cremation Lily posted a very interesting graph that shows the correlation between coronavirus cases and political leanings. And when you look at the data, you very clearly see that the places with the most severe outbreaks now are overwhelmingly what we would call red states, whereas it is blue states that are doing better right now. Now, this is going by governor. Now, this is a little tricky because Massachusetts, for example, has a Republican governor who is one of the more moderate Republicans in the country, and we have one of the most left-wing legislatures in the country. So to put Massachusetts, by all measures, really is a blue state. But in any case, this gives us an idea that you had the early hotspots when it came to coronavirus, and those were really related to places with early infections, mostly because of a lot of direct flights to and from the prior hotspots, meaning China and places in Europe. We didn't really know what we were doing at that point. We're now 5 months in, and now what you're seeing is a divide based on state policy. And very clearly, the places that are doing better have a certain set of policies at the state level, and the graph certainly confirms that. And then lastly, Steelo14 posted an important question about Donald Trump's urgent press conference earlier this week, asking, has a president ever called an urgent, previously unannounced press conference to baselessly attack his political opponent in a completely incoherent manner for an hour straight, and then only take 3 questions? One question coming from right-wing propaganda network OAN. The answer is no. I didn't really have to rack my brain thinking. No other president has done that. And we have a press briefing scheduled for today, which I expect to be yet another just absolute gong show. And no, what we're seeing is unprecedented panic from Donald Trump. I'm losing. Give me a piece of paper with criticisms of Biden. Let me go out there and read it for an hour. I'm losing. Let me replace my campaign manager with only 3.5 months to go. These are signs of desperation, and we've not seen a lot of this before. Join the discussion at davidpakman.com/Reddit. This is free. I'm selling you nothing. It's just a place to discuss the news and politics of the day with other David Pakman Show viewers and listeners. So now let me explain why Donald Trump is panicking, why he has replaced his campaign manager with only 3.5 months to go before the election. 5 new election polls were released yesterday, and Joe Biden is ahead by as little as 3 points in the right-leaning Rasmussen poll and by as much as 15 points nationally in the latest Quinnipiac University poll. In that same Quinnipiac poll, Donald Trump's approval has collapsed to 36%. No president has had a 36% approval this close to their re-election election day, potential re-election election day, for a very, very long time. I think this is actually worse than George H.W. Bush in 92, but I'd have to go back and look. So let's look at the new polling we got yesterday, just a ton of new polls. 5 general election polls. NBC News, Wall Street Journal says Biden is up by 11. CNBC says Biden is up 10. Rasmussen, as I mentioned, that's the right-wing pollster, the best one for Trump, has Biden up only 3. Quinnipiac is the most insane one, which says Biden is winning by 15. And then the Economist YouGov poll released yesterday says Biden is up by 9. You also have some interesting state polls. One from this morning in Arizona says Biden is up 5 in Arizona. A North Carolina poll from yesterday says Biden is up 1. Florida poll says Biden up 7, which if Biden wins Florida by 7, you're looking at a historic defeat for Donald Trump. Big if, big if. In Pennsylvania, Biden is up 8. And in Michigan, Wisconsin, and a different Arizona poll, Joe Biden is up by 6. And then if you look at Texas, we saw one poll earlier this week that had Biden up 5 in Texas. The latest poll out of Texas has Trump up 2. But understand that I don't really think Texas is a place Biden's going to win. But Trump won Texas by 9 in 2016. If Trump only wins Texas by 2, that is a major signal about trouble for Donald Trump nationally. So let's pick one of these and look a little more closely at it. The Quinnipiac poll, not only does it have Joe Biden up 15, it has Trump approval at 36%, with 60% disapproving. And the internals on specific issues are important to look at. So let's put up on the screen and I'll tell you what we're looking at here. This is the Quinnipiac poll. Key issues, Trump versus Biden. On handling a crisis, Biden leads 57-38 by 19 points. On handling health care, Biden leads 58-35. That's 23 points. On coronavirus response, Biden leads 59-35. On addressing racial inequality, just brutal, Biden ahead by 32 points. And this is maybe the most interesting one to me. On handling the economy, Biden is now ahead of Trump 50-45. That's the most important factor to me because we often have this situation where Republicans are just more trusted on the economy. I discussed with you last week how it's not really borne out by the facts. Stock market does better under Democratic presidents. Unemployment is lower under Democratic presidents on average. Recessions are more likely under Republican presidents. Inflation is lower under Democratic presidents, et cetera, et cetera. But the stereotype is that Republicans are good for the economy and for business, even though it's actually not true. The fact that Joe Biden now leads Trump by 5 on the economy is massive because that was essentially Trump's last stand. So now what? We've got it, right? We can all just kind of hang for the next 4 months? No, 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 no. Everyone must vote. Do not become complacent even for a second. We don't have it. Trump knows he's up against a wall. Trump knows that it takes 8 to 10 weeks to flatten the curve, and that that's getting us dangerously close to Election Day, and that the cases are still going up, not down. So he knows he needs dirty tricks, okay? He knows he needs deceptive online campaigns, voter suppression, trying to hide coronavirus data, or both, really. So do not become complacent even for a moment. And we'll have more coverage of this and this latest polling on the David Pakman Show Instagram page. That's David Pakman Show on Instagram. Follow us there, and we will have much more for you right after this short break.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on your support, and the easiest way is through membership, which includes the world-famous bonus show, as well as commercial-free audio and video streams of the show just for members. Sign up today at joinpakman.com. Coupon code saves you 40%. Vote soon 18.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It is great to welcome back to the program today Dr. Christopher DiCarlo, who's an award-winning philosopher, educator, and author of this, the latest book on critical thinking called So You Think You Can Think, Tools for Having Intelligent Conversations and Getting Along. It's great to have you back on.
Good to be here. Always a pleasure.
So a common question I get from viewers when I take live calls is, I have family members who believe this or who believe that, and I want to know how it is that I should confront them. And usually my answer is that depends on how willing you are to ruin the relationship. In other words, there's ways to do this more lightly with a Socratic method of questioning and sort of gentle inquiry into how one formed their beliefs. There's ways to have these conversations much more pointedly and aggressively. Give me your sort of 30,000-foot view on how some of these often difficult conversations can be approached.
Right. So in this book, I talk about spectral discussions. And what I mean by that is if an issue can be polarized, and many of them are, polarized. Take, for example, gun control, something to which your country deals with on a daily basis. What you do is you look at the extremes of that. What should we do? Well, allow all guns everywhere, no matter what. You can drive a tank to work, you can do all that kind of stuff. The other end of the spectrum, no guns whatsoever, all that kind of thing. And then start by determining where on the spectrum the two discussants lie. Like, where are you? And then see how in fact, polarized those views are. And then try to imagine, is there any common area between those two positions? And what are those? So, start with, what is your argument? What is it that you believe? Allow me to understand that. Have each other say what their arguments are back to each other. We call it steel manning. You're probably familiar with this.
Yeah.
Rather than straw manning the other person's argument and making it a mockery, you really want to say, okay, so let me get this straight. Is this what you believe? And then you lay it on the line. Then they can do the same. Now you know where you are on that spectrum. And now you can talk about, would we be able to change our views? Is there any evidence or any information that might draw us closer together. So I'm finding that this method is becoming very helpful.
Yeah, so Peter Boghossian has described that what would cause you to change your mind if it were the case, the feasibility test to see if someone is even open to re-examining their beliefs. Now, when it comes to, I mean, just to pick something that has come up recently here in the United States, and by the way, so Christopher's Canadian, and that's why he said your country, and just so people understand the context here of the discussion, here in the United States, there's a big controversy now around statues, Confederate era statues and statues reminiscent of slavery. And one of the critiques I had of a lot of the conversations that are happening are that the conversations in media are often only represented by extreme views, meaning you should never take a statue down. And on the other hand, take down George Washington because he owns, like these extremes. Whereas most people probably would be able to have a more nuanced conversation like, well, listen, there was an era where everybody had slaves, and what we should look at is maybe more whether the individual is known for promoting slavery versus whether they're really right. So that seems to be a big part of the conversation, that often the conversations are only happening in extremes.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate, right? That and the media is partially to blame because they love the extremes, right? You've got a great story, you get more clicks, you get more hits, you get
Yes.
more viewers, whatever it is. You know, we're fascinated with the confrontation, as it were. We've lost the capacity to appreciate nuance, and it looks like we're in a baby out with the bathwater kind of movement right now, where, you know, no matter what good a person has done in their life, if during those times they were involved in other types of activities which are now deemed quite reprehensible or horrific or horrible or, you know, whatever it is, then everything that that person might have accomplished that was good is ignored because they were involved with these other, you know, kind of nefarious or questionable types of moral activities. And we need to have the conversation around these statues to look at them and say, you know, what good, if any, has this person done for humanity, and what are the bad things, and use these as teachable moments. And if they are indeed offensive for whatever reasons, should we just put them in museums then, and then use them for educational purposes to say, yes, this person did X, Y, and Z, but you know what? They also did this as well. You know, I teach at Ryerson University. Edgerton Ryerson was responsible for the school systems that put a lot of Aboriginal kids, took them away from their parents and put them in these schools, what's called the residential school problem. But his statue is still standing at Ryerson University, and I'm wondering if it's just a matter of time before, you know, people think, you know, that's got to come down as well. So he did a lot of great things for education, but he also did some not so great things. The world is more complicated. If we hold our heroes, you know, those in high esteem too high, they have that much farther to fall when we realize nobody's perfect. And you know, we are a nuanced, difficult species at best.
Here in the United States, we're experiencing the deadly repercussions, I don't think that's an exaggeration, of a critical thinking gap or lack when it comes to coronavirus. And this applies to understanding how masks work. This comes to, you know, ideas like if we tested less, we'd have fewer cases. I mean, there's no shortage of sort of examples. What do you make of the way in which this is failing in the United States? Is it education? Is it culture? Is it economics? I mean, like, where do we start?
Yeah, there are so many systems involved here, right? And some of the work I'm doing in critical thinking is something I call relational systemics, which is to look at all the systems that are involved that interplay and cause people to think the way they do at a given time in history. Yeah, we can look at the education systems for sure, but you got to understand, you know, memes can kill you. I mean, I've written about, you know, mimetic equilibrium and the idea that when you get comfortable with a set of ideas, it doesn't matter if they run counter to reality. You know, if ideology can outweigh reality, and in so doing, you mentioned it, weaponized ignorance. You talk about the idea that the mask has become a symbol of oppression in your country for some people, and that is absolutely bizarre for the rest of the world to look at that and think, you're missing a really important point here, and that is this is a public health issue. It's apolitical. It has nothing to do with politics. We want everybody to survive. We don't care what your politics is. We don't want you to die. We don't want you to, feel discomfort or to spread the disease any further. So, that is a horrific example of weaponizing ignorance and using it as a tool or a symbolic representation of a political movement.
So some people in my audience feel very strongly, and I've even said this before, that if critical thinking and epistemology and philosophy were a part of everybody's schooling starting probably around 7th grade, age 12, that a lot of this that we're seeing would be short-circuited and preempted altogether. But then I do get pushback from people who work in school systems that are teaching these things to some degree, saying the problem is bigger than that, and you have to understand that teachers can only do so much anyway, and a lot of it is what's going on at home and what's going on in culture and what's going on in the media. So what's the lowest hanging fruit? Where do we start to turn this around, and what could have the biggest effect most quickly?
Right. I've been lobbying governments here in Canada and have had some success with trying to get critical thinking taught first of all, at the high school system. You know very well, David, that critical thinking teaches people how to think, right? It's the tools that allow them to better understand information and then to determine, the acceptability of that information and whether or not they should act on that information. And I do very much believe if we could get critical thinking into the schools as early as possible, I believe 7 and 8 is probably the right time to start to introduce it, to get it going. I think it would be much more difficult for people to then say, I don't care what science says, my leader maintains X.
Yes.
Because it empowers people. Critical thinking isn't just something you do, it's what you live. And we have to make that a part of people's lives so that it becomes almost reflexive. It almost becomes a reflex action when information is presented in a particular way that is false to the way in which the natural world actually functions. And that's where we need to start. We need to start at those middle age grades, 7 and 8, and all the way through high school, for sure.
From the standpoint of the virus and what you've observed, what if we do a sort of analysis of fallacious thinking or fallacious assertions? What are the main fallacies that you're seeing in the context of discussions about cases, viral spread, contagion, treatment, masks, et cetera? I mean, just if you have a couple bullet points on that.
Right. Well, first of all, it's the misinformation and disinformation we have to stop. And that's, what was it? Twain said a lie can make itself around the world, halfway around the world while the truth is putting its shoes on or whatever. So once misinformation gets out there, we need to focus on how to combat that quickly and effectively. And to me, there's no easy solution for that. Social media has gotten to the point where influencers are being trusted more than, scientists.
Yes.
And right once we get to that level, then I think it becomes paramount that science and the influencers, if possible, the scientists and the influencers could somehow work together, right?
What's horrifying about that is some attempts were made. Like, for example, Dr. Fauci did a bunch of live streams with folks like Stephen Curry, the NBA basketball player, and trying to sort of bring... I don't know if it was too little or too late, but you've got, a political movement which is listening more to a game show host than an infectious disease doctor.
I know. I just don't know. It just feels like we're living in an alien's thought experiment. It just seems so weird what's happening, right? To see this occur and to know what the truth is. And I'm not talking about big T metaphysical truth or anything. I'm just talking about scientific probabilistic truth that is for the benefit of all humankind. And I'm at a loss with this one in terms of what's the best way to engage in having the conversation. Like, how much evidence can be provided in order to convince somebody that they really ought to wear a mask, right? That it's not a political statement, that finally Trump wore one for the first time, I think, the other day. What was he at, Walter Reed or wherever?
Yeah.
And, they basically said, you're wearing one. So that's good. Somebody's got to stand up to this guy. Like, I don't know why people aren't, but maybe that's just that cult of personality that he has, right?
When it comes to statistics, it's, of course, we know very much about how statistics can be shaped in order to give the impression of A or the opposite of A, and a lot of it is just understanding the mechanisms that are used. What specifically can you recommend to the audience in order to parse statistics for themselves, like when Donald Trump says we're testing more than anyone, or the death rate has to come down tenfold? Is this a mathematical understanding that people need, or is it more of a critical thinking understanding?
Both. Like, I really do think statistical and probabilistic reasoning is a part of critical thinking, and it should be taught fairly early on. And I'm actually dealing with teachers right now who are, creatively using the pandemic to teach students about statistics and probability. It's a wonderful teachable moment that they're using under such hard, conditions. It's like that, the flower emerging out of, the manure kind of thing. It's wonderful to see them taking this as a teachable moment that they can then say, look, as I say, this is a numbers game. This comes down to numbers, and the better numbers we have, the more accurate we can be with those numbers. Testing, tracing, tracking, knowing who has it, knowing who doesn't have it. Look, until there's a vaccine, this is what we've got. This is our defense, especially with a virus that has, such a large asymptomatic population. And that's really what we're dealing with here. And nobody really wants to address that. But the fact of the matter is, we can solve a lot of the issues if it's done intelligently and if we have the right numbers. But we have to be together on this.
In the United States, if you look at county data, you see that the growth rates of cases are significantly higher in counties that voted for Donald Trump relative to counties that voted for Hillary Clinton. But if we step back from that, maybe so specifically, in your work, have there been certain groups that seem to do better when it comes to critical thinking than worse? And I'm not talking about genetically or anything like that, but through cultural and education reasons, whether it's Democrats versus Republicans or religious versus non-religious or whatever the case may be. Are there trends you've observed?
That's a great question. I mean, we have seen that those who are more fervently religious have a little bit more difficult time reconciling inconsistencies with their worldviews, but that's to be expected, right? My take on religion is basically, you can believe in anything you want, you just can't harm people through those beliefs or harm other species through those beliefs. So if you're so dogmatic, you've reached a point where you refuse to entertain the possibility that you could be wrong. You see the obvious danger in that. And when I look at someone like Donald Trump, there is nothing more dangerous than blind ignorance, which is not even knowing you don't know. Like, that's a really dangerous epistemic state of mind to be in. And I see it continuously. And so, yeah, if a person is overly dogmatic, that's obviously going to present barriers, right? And then you have to adjust your strategy for having a conversation with that person. You have to be much more Socratic, much more gentle in your approach, because the harder you try to consider or analyze their beliefs, the more they're going to dig in and say, you're the problem, not me.
What do you think will be the long-term effect on society of the virus? I had a conversation with Brian Greene not long ago, and there's sometimes this instinct that this is really going to change things, period. And public health is going to be done differently. The way people greet each other is going to change permanently. I tend to go in the direction of things sort of return to the mean and people go back to normal, and it's very hard to get really long-lasting change for humans. Where are you on that issue?
I'm hopeful. I'm cautiously optimistic. But let's face it, David, my colleagues and I have been writing to our politicians and to politicians in China for, over 2 decades, basically saying, look, there's going to be a pandemic if we don't put initiatives in place that monitor the sale of certain types of species of animals. Like it was just a ticking time bomb. It was not a matter of if, but when. And, a lot of them would come back and say, well, we caught SARS, we took care of MERS, we got H1N, we got a vaccine for H1N. We're doing a good job. And my colleagues and I were saying, yeah, until we get either a long incubation period or people who are asymptomatic or both, and then you're not going to be ready. And they didn't listen to that. So I'm very hopeful that in the future, we are able to develop worldwide policies for other countries in terms of how things are done. And this is not to, necessarily be, critical of other cultures for their lifestyles and whatnot. No, this is really just a world public health issue.
Yeah, these are just facts.
Just facts. If bats, and we know bats contain a lot of viruses, and they do jump to other species, which then can jump to humans, we need to take the science and we need to utilize that as best as we can to make sure this doesn't happen again. Or if it does, we've got measures in place that will stop it very, very quickly and not allow this to occur. Now, that's hopeful for the future. In regards to your other questions, I think early on after people start to get vaccinated, it's going to take a little while for people to just start, some anyhow, to handshake or to congregate in groups or whatnot. It's going to be interesting. Is it going to make a world of germaphobes? I hope not. I want people to be germ aware. We need to be smart about pathogens, and I'm very hopeful that you're in the Boston area where they filmed Jaws. You're probably too young to remember this, but when Jaws came out, there was a huge influx of students taking marine biology, right? They were majoring in marine biology. When Indiana Jones came out, there was a huge influx of students taking archaeology. I'm hoping after this, there's a huge influx of people going into microbial ecology, which is exactly what we need. We need people to understand the interconnectedness of the very tiny pathogens to the rest of the world. It's really an arms race between us and pathogens. And this was a virus, a relatively weak virus. This was, I'm not going to say easy, but
it could have been much worse.
Oh my goodness. This could have been, imagine if this were like an Ebola.
Right.
Like, it would be horrific. It would be, Black Death time. It would be not a good time for this planet.
Yeah. The book is So You Think You Can Think, Tools for Having Intelligent Conversations and Getting Along. We've been speaking with the book's author, Dr. Christopher DiCarlo. So great to have you on. I appreciate your time once again.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on the support of our viewers and listeners, and one way to keep us going is through Patreon, where you can pledge as little as $1 per month or as much as you want at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Great perks and benefits as well. Read about them.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So it's Thursday, and we do have new jobs numbers. Another 1.3 million Americans have filed first-time unemployment claims, meaning last week, remember, this week we learned the numbers from last week, another 1.3 million Americans have lost their jobs. Are you becoming numb to these numbers to some degree? I mean, I want to remind you, before the 15 weeks in a row of coronavirus job losses, the previous single day record for new unemployment claims was about 700,000. We've had as many as 6.6 million in 1 week and continue to have right under 1.5 million per week for several weeks now. And the reason that this week is particularly important is that today we got the numbers from last week. In the last week, we have seen states have to sort of re-shut down elements of the economy. That's happening this week. Meaning next week and the week after are going to be crucial weeks in seeing whether these numbers start to go up again. The rate at which Americans have been losing their jobs has been coming down. We're still seeing people lose jobs, but we had 6.6 million 1 week and then 5 million, 4 million, et cetera. The rate has been coming down. Things are reclosing, though, and the next 2 weeks could be particularly ugly. Last week was more of a normal week, you might say, as normal as things can be during a pandemic, and 1.3 million more people lost their jobs. So that's now 15 straight weeks of job losses. That's a total of 51 million jobless claims since coronavirus started. Now, I know people email me as if I'm trying to deceive. I'm mentioning we don't have 51 million people out of work right now. So 51 million people at some point lost their jobs during the last 15 weeks. Many millions of those have either gone back to work or found new jobs. So of the 51 million, only about 18 million remain actively unemployed right now. And that's obviously far better than 51 million, although still historically high. So now the question is, what happens next week? Coronavirus has forced California to reclose sectors of its economy. Indoor dining is done, movie theaters, a whole bunch of stuff that had been open is now closing. I won't give you the full list of states, but there are many that are having to go backwards in terms of opening. Even Texas is actually having to step back. So this week, which will be reported next week, and also the following week, are going to be very, very important. Now, the other thing that's upcoming, and I want to remind you about it, is that on July 30th, we're going to get the first estimate of second quarter GDP. Second quarter GDP has been widely expected by both the left and the right to be maybe the worst economic quarter for the United States, possibly ever. We might get the worst GDP number in 14 days that we have ever seen in the United States. The second quarter, of course, was April, May, June. At the end of June, some stuff was starting to reopen. A lot of the opening has happened in July. So at the end of this month, we're going to get an estimate of just how bad was second quarter GDP. I don't know how bad it's going to be. The expectation is that it's going to be quite bad. And sometimes when you get a bad number that's slightly better than what was expected, it actually feels like, hey, we actually got off less seriously than we might have. So I don't know what the answer is going to be. But in terms of the timing, July 30th, we're going to get an estimate of Q2 GDP. August 30th is when we'll get a more fine-tuned number. And that is going to be very, very close to the election of either Joe Biden or Donald Trump for another 4 years. And this is exactly as we've been predicting for a couple of months. Cases going up. Q2 GDP number is going to be dropped on top of us sometime in the next 2 to 6 weeks with different specificity and precision as we get more accurate numbers. By August 30th, we are going to have dramatically more information than we have right now about what the end of the year in early 2021 is likely to be for the United States. We may also have some vaccine news. We may also have news about therapeutics. So in my mind, I have a question on Friday's show this week about where do I believe the point of no return is for Donald Trump in terms of if he doesn't turn his polling around. And I'm going to make the case that it's October 1st. However, I'm seeing September 1st as a date at which point we are likely to have a lot of additional important information about how things are going. Economic data, case data, and much, much more. Donald Trump's daughter, Ivanka Trump, not only made a fool out of herself holding a can of Goya beans, but appears to have broken the same ethics rules and federal law that Kellyanne Conway broke when she previously promoted Ivanka Trump's jewelry line. And now Donald Trump is also getting in on the action. So let me back up a little bit and explain the entire thing to you now. Goya Foods, commonly just known as Goya, is an American company that sells food products that are often in the Hispanic foods aisle in grocery stores. It's kind of a weird name, but not really the focus of this segment. But it's everything from beans to frozen products, flour, coconut, canned coconut, sauces, marinades, etc. Goya sells a lot of different things. And the company is owned by the Unanue family, and they're the second richest Spanish-American family. And by Spanish, now I'm talking about the country of Spain. They are a billionaire family from Spain. The CEO, Robert Unanue, was recently invited to the White House to one of these propaganda events that Donald Trump has been holding. And the Goya CEO said that Donald Trump is a blessing for the United States, that the United States is blessed to have Donald Trump as president. And many people, including many Hispanic customers of Goya products, didn't like it. And there were calls for boycotts. The normal reaction outrage cycle took place. Oh, everybody calling for a boycott is suppressing the speech of Goya. Well, this Tuesday, Ivanka Trump tweeted a picture of herself holding a can of Goya black beans with the message, if it's Goya, it has to be good, followed by a Spanish translation, si es Goya, tiene que ser bueno, or as Argentinians would say, si es Goya, tiene que ser bueno. So this was just wacky. She looks like a crazy person. The optics are bizarre. And I tweeted it out with the message, something is very wrong with this woman. But then it started to get more interesting. Yesterday, Donald Trump did something similar, posing with Goya products in the White House, including what looked like a can of coconut, chocolate wafers, beans, and more. And this is a violation of federal law. 5 CFR 2635.702. That's a mouthful. It's called use of public office for private gain. And it says an employee shall not use his public office for his own private gain, for the endorsement of any product, service, or enterprise, or for the private gain of friends, relatives, or persons with whom the employee is affiliated in a non-governmental capacity. This is the exact same thing that Kellyanne Conway violated when she suggested people go out and buy Ivanka's jewelry. In short, people in public office can't endorse products in this way. But that gets us to the next level of insanity, which is, on the one hand, Ivanka's an advisor to Donald Trump. On the other hand, she's not supposed to work for Trump because of anti-nepotism laws. But on the other hand, they've gotten around this by making her this kind of vague advisor rather than somebody with a formal position, which she clearly would be barred from having. But she's still an administration official of sorts, but she's breaking the law by promoting products. But they can go back to, well, she's really an unofficial advisor. It's a circle of swamp. It's a never ending swamp that gets deeper and deeper with every passing week of this administration. But here's the deal. I actually have an optimistic message for you today. I'm not worried about this. The administration doesn't care. Trump's family doesn't care. This is the swamp filling corruption we were told they were going to end. We just have to remove them in 3.5 months. Keep an eye on the bigger picture rather than getting bogged down in individual instances of swamp filling. We know they have to go. Ivanka posing with black beans doesn't change anything. Yes, of course it's illegal. There are not going to be any consequences. Just vote him out. Just vote. We have all the information we need, and we are prepared to vote him out in November. But are we going to get enough turnout to do it? I hope we don't all have that horrible feeling again on November 4th that we had in November of 2016. I don't want it, and I'll be doing everything I can to prevent it. But, try not to worry too much about yet another law-breaking action. We've just got to remove them. Otherwise, this will continue. We have a great voicemail number. That number is 2192-DAVID-P. And I have a new top caller to play for you today. This is a caller who I don't really understand their message. There's an indescribable je ne sais quoi to this voicemail. There seems to be xylophone music playing in the background. It's an incredibly well-produced voicemail. I don't know what to make of it, but I absolutely love it. Take a listen to this.
Thank you, FS, especially with all the representatives that are, well, anyway. It's great to hear your voice, and I'm so proud of the youth and all that it has to entail. But anyway, David Pakman,
yeah,
you brought me to the fact of recognizing good television, and I'm proud of this presentation that you represent. And thank heaven for your father and mother for bringing a substantial, intelligent gentleman on the television. I'm Lerone Jenkins. I made a mistake before when I was making presentations on how great you are. But I was thinking about you would be a candidate for president.
Wow.
Due for it. 650.
Oh, whoa. Okay. We don't want to put out their phone number. Of course, I cannot be president under the current law because I was born in another country. I immigrated to the United States from Argentina. So I can never be president unless the law is changed. But I really appreciate that. The xylophone in the background is a beautiful, beautiful touch. I don't know if that's digitally added or what's going on, but thank you. I don't know that I have been called a gentleman in any voicemail before. Usually I'm called other things, and it's not quite so good. We have a great bonus show for you today. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp is banning mask mandates. Banning mask mandates. This will lead to unnecessary deaths, okay? Period. People will die who didn't have to because Brian Kemp, governor of Georgia, is saying cities cannot require masks to be worn. A California city has moved to replace police with unarmed civilians for certain types of traffic stops. It's a very interesting proposal, which we will discuss. And lastly, we now are getting more and more data about the rehiring that is going on in some sectors of the economy. And what we are seeing small businesses do is, yes, rehire staff, but often at lower pay and often at fewer hours, according to a new survey publicized by CNBC. So we're going to talk about that on the bonus show as well. Remember, you can get instant access to the bonus show by becoming a member at joinpacman.com. If you would like a discount off of your membership, give a try to the coupon code July Surprise, all one word, all lowercase. July Surprise, I think will give you a nice little surprise when you use that coupon code on a new membership at joinpacman.com. And remember, as always, you can get the daily audio podcast for free on whatever your favorite podcasting app is. If you are going back to work and commuting and you want something to listen to, if you're biking around, a very safe coronavirus activity, I'm listening to podcasts when I bike around Boston, of course, wearing a mask and the full thing. Consider the David Pakman Show audio podcast, Spotify, iTunes, etc., etc. I'll see you on the bonus show. Thanks so much for watching today's full episode of the show. Just a reminder, today's sponsor is Blinkist, the app that lets you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try Blinkist for free and save 25% off of a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've also included the link right underneath this video.